Hello and welcome to Voices from the Left. I'm your host, Craig. Thanks for listening. We have so far to go to realize our human potential for compassion, altruism, and love. Jane Goodall. My guest this week is Patrick, aka Mr.JonesX. Patrick is a human rights activist and TikTok creator. We'll be talking about advocacy through an intersectional lens.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. All right, let's get into it here. So, Patrick, will you please tell me about yourself and your background, etc.?
To be honest with you, this is like one of the hardest things for me to do, right? Because I mean, I feel like it's so complicated. I went to school to do a thing, and I realized I didn't like the thing. I ended up, for the most part, working as a finance director in the car industry for a whole bunch of years. So I was very high up in a very massive organization, one of the largest automobile dealership chains in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And in that position, I realized that no matter what I did, at the end of the day, I was still a Black man. And so that it wasn't really going to ever bear the fruits of my labor. I mean, so while in that position, I started to dive into, I guess, the historicity, like, why do people feel the way that they feel? Why do people think the way that they think? Why do people act the way that they act? Where did this all come from? How did it all start? I one day I said, you know what, I've had enough of this. And I decided that my life needed to take a different path. And that different path was advocating for people who didn't have a voice, who weren't in positions of power.
Sure. Excellent. So that segues nicely into my next question then. So you had that sort of revelation, right? Epiphany. And so you decided to become, to work more in human rights advocacy. How are you able to transition from that job to start doing the advocacy?
I was in a very male dominated profession. I saw the way that, people of color were treated. I saw the way that women were treated. I saw the way that disabled people were treated. I saw the way that, people that were overweight or, considered overweight were treated. I just saw how, if you weren't cisgender, heterosexual, Christian, white male, or at least, I'm saying very closely aligned with that, that kind of society felt like you didn't deserve nice things. And to be honest with you, I would say that I was always in advocacy. When I was a young child in elementary school, I would advocate for myself. They would tell stories about the indigenous people or enslaved people, and they didn't align with the research that I had done and the conversation that I had with my father and so on and so forth. So I pushed back. I'm like, well, that's not true. Well, that's not true.
I bet
Well, that's
the
not true.
teachers
And then they would
that.
say, yeah, well, they would say, well, how do you know? I was like, well, shit, I have every single volume of Encyclopedia Britannica,
Yeah,
and I've read them all.
Awesome.
And so like I actually had done the research. I'm talking about third, fourth, fifth grade.
Wow.
I mean, I was reading Angela Davis. I was reading Malcolm X. I was reading
that's
James
awesome.
Baldwin. And I just don't think that the teachers were prepared for that.
Right. No,
So I wouldn't stand for the national anthem. I wouldn't pledge allegiance to a flag. And so they kind of saw me as a menace to society in school.
Yeah.
And so I would say that I always had the spirit of advocacy, I guess.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I never really, I don't know, went along with the status quo. In high school, my hair was dyed blonde. I had 4 piercings in my ear. I would literally I played basketball, and I loved, Jordans, Michael Jordan tennis shoes. but I would buy the women's Jordans.
Oh, nice.
Just a couple of size up because they came in cool colors, you know what
Sure.
I'm saying? Pinks and purples and blues that, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and the other men didn't have them, and women, you know, didn't wear Jordans as much as men did.
Sure.
And so people thought I was odd, but I was like, why do you guys, you know, feel like you need to conform to all of these things? And so I feel like I always pushed the envelope. And then I tried to fit myself into a box, you know, as an adult, because I was a parent and I needed to make money. And then one day I realized that box was too small. So I think that's how I got into, you know, into advocacy. I'm like, there's all of these people that are treated so poorly. I even participated in it. I'm not going to lie. I bought into the patriarchy. I was definitely misogynist. I would say like the vast majority of cisgender people in the you know, the late 90s and early 2000s were homophobic to an extent, even if it wasn't intentional.
Right.
You know, we used terms and slurs, you know, as colloquialisms, as everyday language. And, you know, through studying sociology and cultures and advocacy and civil rights leaders, I realized that, you know, there's a different way that we can do this where everybody, you know, can get an equitable piece of the pie, so to speak, an equitable opportunity. And so I've been fighting for that, I'd say, for the last decade and some change.
Excellent. Excellent. So you've talked about that a little bit, or you've talked about this a little bit, but can you define intersectionality?
Yeah, absolutely. So intersectionality is essentially like where people fit in terms of our society. Now, our society juxtaposed to the rest of the world is very unique. We are probably the most multicultural, multi-ethnic, multifaceted nation on the planet. People like to call it a melting pot. I don't necessarily like that term because I feel like, you know, melting pot would insinuate that everybody gets into this pot and then they all become one, right? Like now it's all just one, and everybody's the same, but we're not that. We're not that. We're more like what would you call it? A trail mix.
Sure.
We're more like a trail mix, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so everybody within that bag of trail mix, you know, fits in a category and sometimes multiple categories. And so when we're looking at intersectionality, right, we look at the top of it, and it's what I was talking about earlier: cisgender, heterosexual, Christian, white, male, typically, you know, able-bodied, of relatively good health, and potentially, you know, of higher than average socioeconomic status. And then, you know, then you have everybody else. And so that is like the pinnacle, right, of this societal structure, this social hierarchy, if you will. Yeah. And then, you know, you have to find out, well, where do I fit in terms of, you know, society? What is my societal value, my social currency, right? And so if we were looking at the bottom of that, we would have like Black or Indigenous woman, maybe even possibly even trans woman, right? So Black or Indigenous trans woman who could quite potentially be disabled or have a mental health issue. There's a good chance that they're not going to be financially stable. There's a good chance that they don't have, you know, are not part of, you know, the Christian faith. And that would be, you know, your bottom rung of society. And then you have essentially everything in between. So intersectionality is just being able to see how these different identities intersect with each other, and how we can make sure that we are building a society where all of the needs from bottom to the top of the people are met and everybody has an equitable opportunity within said society.
Right on. What why is intersectionality important for like liberation movements and struggles and things like that?
I mean, that's a great question, and that's one of the things that is the core of my teaching, or my message, I should say. If I believe in a bottom-up approach, same with trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics has never worked. There's no reason for the people at the top to relinquish their wealth or relinquish their power, right? And so if we're focusing on making sure that the least of these, Bible reference, that the least of these, right, have all of their needs met, the people that need the most amount of accommodations, right? So if we make sure that the people that need the most amount of accommodations needs are met, it's almost impossible for the needs of everybody else not to be.
For sure.
You understand what I'm saying? So essentially, the rising tide lifts all ships. So if and I use this analogy often. If there's a wall, right, and we're all trying to get over the wall, we're all trying to get over this wall. If there's a person that is face down in the mud and we're standing on their back, it's not going to do much to get us over the wall.
Right.
Us standing on their back is not going to do much to get them off, get us over the wall.
Right.
But if we can get them to their knees and then to their feet, and give us a boost to the top of the wall, then we can reach down and lift them up.
Sure. Yeah.
And so that's why I believe that intersectionality is the core, should be the core of all liberation movements. If you're not focused on the most marginalized within the community, right, then you're not looking for liberation for everybody. You're simply looking for liberation for yourself. And there's a good chance if you're simply looking for liberation for yourself, that you only want to oppress differently. Yep. You're like, I want to be up here at the top of this social structure so I can look down on you.
Yep. For sure.
So that's why I think that it's probably one of the most important, if not the most important aspect of liberation movements.
Yeah. Excellent. Would you, this kind of made me think of another question. Something I've heard talked about is with union movements and the like class struggle in particular. I know that a lot of the unions along the way, the last probably longer than 30 years, but let's say 40 years, they've kind of changed, I think, from having the hardline union staff like a Hoffa, right, to maybe kind of being co-opted kind of by more like business. Savvy's the wrong word, but they don't have the best intentions of everyone in the union. And you can
absolutely not.
You can see that when, from what I've heard, I haven't experienced it personally myself, but I've heard people talk about how, well, the labor movement is harming the movement because they'll say, hey, we need to worry about getting this for this group, but they are ignoring every other need, right? To say, well, you can get that after we get this, right? And
well, I know that this is going to, I'm saying, like, we're going to be like moving a little bit further in the discussion in terms of me answering this question, but you have to understand, like, even in these labor movements, right? There's, if we're looking at it through an intersectional lens, it's going to focus on, right? Because most of these, we have to look at it. Most of these labor, the leaders in these labor movements and these unions are going to be what?
Yep.
White men.
Yep.
And so they're going to be working for the interest of people that look and think and believe and feel like them.
Right.
And as long as, and I don't even, like I said, I don't even believe that it's something that they do intentionally. I believe that, it's a product of our environment. It's a product of our society. And then capitalism, right? Like,
yep.
we got to factor in capitalism.
100%.
Capitalism, money is always going to play a factor. So they're going to be thinking about how much is this going to benefit me? And am I taking care of the people that look like me?
Yep.
So
for sure. And it's interesting because a lot of them seem to think like, well, I can become part of the capitalist class if I do this, right?
Yeah, I make this joke all the time.
That's simply not true. I mean, for
right.
99.9% of the people that feel that way, right? It's just never going to happen, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
80% of American citizens die in the same or worse socioeconomic status that they were born into. 80%.
I believe that.
And I refuse to believe that 80% of the American citizens are just flat out lazy, right?
Yeah.
I just want to,
that's not true.
It has to be something else. And with that being said, I make this joke all the time, especially when we look at Trump supporters. They're out here bootlicking, for lack of a better expression,
totally,
for billionaires.
Yep.
Sending their hard-earned money, taking out second mortgages on their house to contribute to the Stop the Steal, right? A billionaire constantly asking them for money.
Right.
Simultaneously not paying any of his own debts. But they believe deep down inside that they're one scratch off and one lottery ticket, one Mega Millions ticket from being there. And that's because society has taught a certain demographic of individuals in this country that they are entitled to a certain, not only social status, but socioeconomic status as well. And that's what I was talking about social currency earlier, right? That they believe that their social currency should equate to their actual monetary value.
Yep.
Their social capital should be in kind with their monetary worth. And Lyndon B. Johnson famously said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you.
Yeah, that is. I've heard that one before. It's sad but true. Unfortunately. Yep. What's even more interesting to me about the people that think they're, like you said, one lottery ticket away from the capitalist class is that everyone outside the capitalist class is much closer to being without a house than they are being part of the capitalist class.
$500 to $1,000 away from abject poverty. Absolutely.
Right. And I'm saying that knowing that not everybody outside the capitalist class has a house. So don't, you know what I mean?
Right.
The ones who do have, I shouldn't say house, a place to live, a safe place to stay that they don't have to worry
Stable
about.
Housing,
that they don't have to worry about, right? We're all much closer away from poverty than we are being billionaires.
Absolutely.
All right. So of the struggles you're involved with, how do you work to ensure that those struggles aren't corrupted by discrimination and bigotry?
I'm going to be honest with you. That is something that I struggle with daily, not personally, right? But I have a very large community. And I'm constantly engaged in political discussions, sociological debates, political debates, so on and so forth. And oftentimes I'll see members of my community use ableism to describe the people that I'm engaged in, in discourse with, right? And I use that term debate very loosely. I would say structured arguments or semi-structured arguments of sorts. Or scheduled talks, right? Sure. Because I feel like a debate entails that both parties are engaged in academic, are coming at it from an academic standpoint. And to be honest with you, here in today's society, which is a shame, it's just a product of our education system, right? The vast majority of our populace is not well educated, especially on intersectionality, especially on sociological aspects of our country. And and the world, for that matter. And they're also not well read, because the average American citizen doesn't comprehend the things that they're reading past the 5th grade reading level. So they might be able to pronounce the words, but they don't know what they mean. And in context, they also can't understand.
Sure.
And so I feel like oftentimes I'm having to speak to them at a level in which they can understand. And oftentimes they still don't get it. And so I constantly see people who fashion themselves as aligned with me using terms as like, oh, they're slow, or, you know, they're the R slur, which I don't prefer to say it, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And so not understanding that they're stooping essentially to the same level.
Right.
And I have a lot of people who have been in my inner circle, or have been in part of my my movement, who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, but are also transphobic and don't understand why. Or they're transmedicalists. I don't want to assume that you're familiar with that term, or that your listeners are. But they feel like trans people are only actually trans people if they go through with having, surgery.
Okay.
And so it is an issue. It is, in fact, an issue that bigotry can certainly exist, even when people believe, that they're aligned with you.
Sure. And how much of that do you think is subconscious or unknown to them, and how much, certainly some of it's overt, right? Are there people that just don't realize they're doing it?
I would say that less of them are overt than not. I honestly believe that the vast majority don't even realize they're participating in these things. Even people like on the left will say things like, oh, well, or who believe they're on the left, right? Like, well, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. My best friend is Black. I have family members that are Black. My daughter dates a Black man. I'm married to a Black person. That doesn't mean that you're not racist. That doesn't mean that you don't, like participate in aspects of white supremacy, or that you don't have racist ideologies that you believe in. My favorite one to ask them is Black on Black crime a real thing? And more times than not, they were like, well, yeah. You know what I mean? And I'm like, no, that's just crime.
Right.
It's just crime.
It's just crime.
And so if we look at it, like, these are crimes of opportunity, or crimes of proximity, because people harm people that they're closest to.
Right.
And if we had true and accurate reporting here in the United States in terms of like how we record this information, most people get their information from the UCR, the FBI. That would be the FBI crime statistics. But they don't know that the FBI crime statistics don't report, all municipalities. Like, they focus on these major cities, which would be predominantly, where African American people live. And so the numbers in and of themselves are skewed. Now, of course, they put disclaimers on there, but people in America don't read.
No. Yeah. And even if they do, they're just gonna be like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, they skim the headlines.
Yeah.
And so I truly believe that it's not even intentional. They're just not aware. You don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yep. So of what, not only just the ones you've been involved in, but all liberatory struggles, how does capitalism work against them?
Oof. But before I go to that,
sure,
really quickly, I just wanted to add one more thing.
Sure.
In terms of how bigotry can disrupt bigotry can disrupt the movement. The Black Panther movement had some of the strongest women, that civil rights has ever seen. And they robbed women of their voices. And it had a lot to do with how that movement, fell apart. And so I just wanted to point that out. I think that for far too long, women, especially in the Black community, have been on the front line of advocacy and activism. And we as Americans and as Black men have not been a support system for them. I mean, we see that with the Black Lives Matter movement. As soon as, Trayvon Martin was unalived, they created this movement. And when George Floyd was killed, they were there. They were there. They were on the front lines and have been historically. And I just don't think that we appreciate them enough for the contributions that they've made. But to answer your question, and I apologize for digressing.
No worries.
Martin Luther King Jr., a very well-known, obviously, and world-renowned civil rights activist, didn't die because he was fighting for civil rights for Black people. He died because he continued that advocacy work into helping white people unionize and fight for labor laws. A lot of people aren't aware of that. But essentially that's where he had crossed the line, right? And it's okay, right? It's always been okay, not necessarily, but it's one thing to say, hey, you have the same rights as everybody else. But it's another thing for, these minority groups to have financial power. Because if you can prevent them from having, money, from having the same access to resources as you do, then you can't control them. And this is precisely why, if you look historically at Black people who are civil rights activists and fought for equity and equality here in the United States, what one thing do they all share in common? It's that they were all labeled Marxists, communists,
yep, right,
socialists. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Angela Davis, Harry Belafonte, Bayard Rustin. I mean, like every single one of these, and then Barack Obama. Oh, he's a socialist. Now we have Kamala Harris. She's a socialist. She's a communist. She's a Marxist. Her dad was a Marxist. Her dad was a civil rights activist. And so, because they don't want any of these movements, right? Any of these liberation movements to turn into equity and resources. Because again, if you can control the resources, you can control the people. If you can control access to the resources, you control the people. Look at after they desegregated schools, then they started charging tuition for state-funded colleges.
Yep.
It was just to create another barrier to entry. Okay, now you can get loans from the bank, but you can only get them in these neighborhoods, redlining. Because we'll let you have this idea, right, that you have equality, separate but equal, essentially.
Sure.
Like, yeah, you have equality, but you cannot have equity, because equity gives you power. So,
for sure.
That's how capitalism works against you know, these liberation movements.
Definitely. And one of the things you were talking about, I think, is mutual aid, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the movements and the I think, from my limited knowledge of it, one of the reasons Fred Hampton was killed was because he was providing
the Rainbow Coalition.
He was providing mutual aid, right?
Absolutely.
And that goes to what you were talking about, power, right? If people don't have to worry about their basic needs being met,
their material conditions,
then they can start concerning themselves with moving up in the hierarchy of motivations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can move up to, thinking about, well, I don't need to take that job. I can pick and choose for a different job, right?
That part.
Right. And I can pick and choose where to stay, maybe, right?
Absolutely.
But if people are always concerned with their material conditions, they can't get to the next level, or it's very difficult to get to the next level.
Because you're living in a state of fear, almost, sure. Perpetually. Almost perpetually living in a state of fear.
Yep.
So you're absolutely right. Speaking on the mutual aid topic,
mm-hmm.
On my platform, and this is just this week. We were able to raise enough finances to buy a single mom a car.
Awesome.
A brand new car. The car is actually sitting in front of my house right now.
Awesome.
We were able to prevent a single mom, her daughter, and her grandchild from being evicted from the house. We were able to prevent a single mom from her power being shut off. We were able to help a person escape a domestic violence situation and put a deposit on a new apartment so they could leave that domestic violence situation.
That's awesome.
And then we were able to help another mom get her alternator replaced on her vehicle so that she could drop her daughter off at her first day in college.
Very cool.
That's just this week. And I'm not talking about a little bit of money.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, several $1,000s.
Right.
I'm talking about probably close to $10,000 just this week. Because when people work together, right, no obstacle is too big. No obstacle is too big. If we all have a unified cause, right, if we're all working towards the same ends, then no obstacle is too big. No obstacle is too big. And shout out to Fred Hampton and people like Huey P. Newton and people like Angela Davis and and the like. Like, these people are the people that framed everything that I believe in. The free lunch and breakfast program that they created. They made sure that every single one of these children in these neighborhoods had breakfast in the morning. Because why send somebody to school that's starving, right? Why send them to school and they're starving? I know that I can't concentrate when I'm hungry.
Right.
I can't get things done when I'm hungry. And not only would they make sure these children had food to eat, but they also made sure that these children got to school safely. And they were made to be social pariahs, as if they were doing something harmful.
Right. They're helping.
And the funny thing is our WIC program in the United States of America is essentially loosely based on what the Black Panther Party had created.
It's just gated, right? It's means tested, right?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Exactly that. I've always been the type of person, and I think, and I attribute this to my parents. Shout out to my parents. I mean, I didn't have the perfect upbringing or anything of that nature, but my parents were willing to help anybody in our neighborhood. My parents knew everybody in all of the houses that lived around us. During the winter, my dad would go and shovel everybody's walkway. Well, not everybody, especially the elderly people or people that he knew were single moms or women living alone and things of that nature. He would shovel their walkway. He would shovel their driveway out. He would make sure that their car could get out in case of an emergency. My mom would, bake cookies during the holidays or whatever other treats, and send us out to pass them out to the neighbors. If somebody had, a roof leak, we knew, they knew who to go to in the neighborhood. And somebody's car broke down, they knew who to go to in the neighborhood. And if somebody, whatever, catastrophic incident would come up, the community worked together. My dad would go to the school that we all went to elementary school to and plant new flowers and plant new plants and didn't ask for any money. He didn't ask for any compensation, made sure that, everything was well manicured because he wanted the children to come in to the school and see something beautiful when they walked in and and uplift their spirits, make them feel like they're coming somewhere that they should be excited about going to. And so if we look back at these, these other movements in the past, without community, and I feel like the United States constantly is fighting against that, but without community, and when you have to fight this fight alone, the chances are, it's not going to, nobody goes to war alone.
Right.
You know what I mean? Nobody goes to war alone. And so I feel like this idea of rugged individualism that is instilled in us, I only care about what's going on in my four walls, and anything outside of that is not my issue. I think that if we continue down this path, that it leads to nothing but darkness and destruction.
Yeah. Well, and that's capitalism, right? It's killing empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making everybody look at their coworkers, their neighbors, to some extent, people they've never even met as competition, right? As someone
Absolutely.
That's standing in their way of success.
Yep. And that's that. Well, I'm gonna hold on to that one. I know you got other questions. I'm gonna hold on to that one, and I'll jump into it.
No worries. So we'll switch gears a little bit here. How can people work to combat the rhetoric around race in the 2024 U.S. presidential election?
That's a great question. But my fear is that not enough people understand how race works. Not enough people even understand what race is. A lot of people think that, Latin or Hispanic is a race, and it's not. You can be Afro-Latin, you can be Latin and white, right?
Yeah.
People say Kamala is not Black. She's absolutely Black. Her father's Black. You know what I'm saying? She was raised in Oakland in a predominantly Black community. She went to an HBCU. She joined a historic Black sorority, right? She's lived the entire Black experience. She's phenotypically Black. And when she says, well, hey, I'm the first Southeast Asian, XYZ, when she was attorney general, when she was senator, when she was vice president, whatever, mm-hmm. Right? That's her ethnic background. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not her race. It's not her phenotypical race. That's her ethnic background. And I think that that's one of the major issues that we're running into right now. So I think that before you run out there and try to advocate and combat the rhetoric, you have to be well informed. about what it is that you're speaking on in the first place. You have to, and this goes back to the original thing. You have to be advocating through an intersectional lens, right? Like you have to actually know what it is that you are advocating for and on whose behalf, and make sure that you're not harming other groups in the process, right? Yep. One of the major tenets of fascism, and I do believe with everything that I am that Donald Trump is in fact a fascist. One of the major tenets of fascism is to create an enemy, to create a unified front against the supposed enemy.
Right.
Right. And because this social hierarchy exists, right, that places white people at the top, right, cisgender, heterosexual, for the most part, white people at the top, right, of this social structure, because it exists, a large portion of that demographic of this group feel like they're entitled to a certain level of, we talked about this earlier, economic status or social status. They feel like they're entitled to it. One lottery ticket away, right? But when they haven't achieved it, when they've fallen short of what they believe they're entitled to, they become disgruntled. And what Donald Trump effectively did, and very effectively, the same thing that Hitler was able to do, was say, hey, listen, this isn't your fault. This isn't your fault. It's the immigrants. It's Black people. It's gay people. It's trans people. It's socialists. It's Marxists. It's all of these other groups. And that is done so that your focus is not on the capitalists. It's on your fellow citizens who are struggling the same way that you are, that you have more in common with than you have differences. But if I can't grab onto your fear, right, and point you in the other direction, you know what I'm saying, then I can't control you. And that's effectively what he's done. He said, hey, listen, don't pay attention to the fact, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Don't pay attention to the fact that I've literally just been fucking funneling money right out of your pockets.
Right.
That I've also put, policy and structures in place that make these rich corporations even richer. Don't pay attention to any of that. Don't pay attention to the fact that I'm the reason that your grocery prices are higher. Yeah. Don't pay attention to the fact that I'm the reason that your gas prices are higher. Pay attention to this shit over here. And Joseph Goebbels, he was the minister of propaganda for Hitler. Yeah. He said the rank and file citizen, the average citizen is relatively unintelligent, right? And so he said, you don't have to tell them the truth. You just have to keep your message short and sweet, right? And repeat it over and over again. And eventually the truth becomes the lie. I mean, the lie becomes the truth. Eventually the lie becomes the truth. And so I guess the only true way that you can combat this is understanding what you're dealing with, right? When you're presenting new information to a lot of these people, they have an amygdala response. It's that part of the brain that's like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you know what I mean? And so they've been told this information so many times, right? And even when they're presented with new information from these people, they have now made all of this a part of their personal identity. The hats, the t-shirts, the flags, the bumper stickers, the keychains, the NFTs, the shoes, the doormats. You know what I mean? Like I could literally go on and on and on, right?
Yep.
They've made it such a part of their identity that if they move themselves away from it now, it's ego death. They've lost every aspect of who they are. They call it the sunken cost fallacy.
Mm.
It's the phenomenon whereby a person is reluctant to abandon a strategy or course of action because they've invested so heavily into this course of action that even when it's clear that abandonment would be more beneficial, they cannot let it go. They cannot let it go. And so you have to understand who you're dealing with. And patience is going to have to be a large aspect of having these conversations. So knowing who you're dealing with, knowing why they feel the way that they feel, knowing where they're coming from, and then trying to approach it in the same manner that you would, talk to your, a family member who you loved, who was engaging in harmful behavior, right? You have to put the kid gloves on. And I know that, that sounds like it sucks, right? But you can't put out a fire with more fire. You know who said that?
I don't recall if I ever did.
Huey P. Newton.
Hmm. It's I think I've seen it floating around.
I apologize. I take that back. It was Fred Hampton. I knew I was wrong when I said it. It was Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton said, "You don't put out a fire with more fire."
Makes sense though, right? You're not gonna go in if you start screaming and hollering and telling people they're dumb or they're not educated or something like that. That's gonna turn them off immediately, right? Yeah.
I want to read this really quickly.
Sure.
If you don't mind. If you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
But he said, a lot of you will say we have to fight fire with fire. He said, yeah, let's go ahead and fight fire with fire. But we say, no, no, no. We don't care how many people say that because nobody knows really what's happening, right? We're not going to fight fire with fire. We're going to fight fire with water. We're not going to fight racism with racism. We're going to fight racism with solidarity. We're not going to fight capitalism with Black capitalism like some of these punks in the city of Chicago want to do. We're going to fight capitalism with socialism. Can't buy your way out of oppression. And where you have to use collectivism, like I was just talking about mutual aid and stuff like that, like you were talking about as well. Mm-hmm. Like you can't use the master's tools to take down the master's house. You have to use a different approach. And sure. So yeah.
That's great. All right. So this next question is it's been something, it's kind of the impetus for my podcast in general, where it came from. But so the left in particular in the United States, I'm sure in other places, but it's in the United States for sure. It has its share of infighting, right? What is one thing that you've seen become a unifying force across intersectional movements?
Well, if you don't mind, I want to address the first part.
Sure.
Even though it's not a question.
No, that's okay.
Because you say the left in the United States has a share of infighting. I think that's one of the things that is the most admirable aspect of the left, right, is that they're willing to call out even their own people. We've seen this as far back as like Al Franken, right? Al Franken, had accusations. They had some conversations with him. He's like, all right, cool, I'll step aside. I don't want to harm the movement, right? I think that that's one of the most admirable things I can say about the left. And I use that term loosely because I don't feel like we have a true left, in the United States. So I use it very loosely, but
sure,
colloquially, we understand that they're at least more left than the Republican Party.
right.
The thing that in terms of like a unifying force across, intersectional movements right now in the current political framework is focusing on women's rights. I think that has become the most unifying aspect of, what we would consider the left here in the United States. And I'm behind that, 1,000,000%. I think that, again, rising tide lifts all ships. If we focus on making sure that women have an equitable foothold within society, I don't think that people realize how valuable women are across all demographics. I just don't think that people understand. Because this patriarchal mindset, this patriarchal social structure that we exist in, devalues women, as much as possible. Like it simply devalues women. It doesn't see them as whole human beings. They're seen as vessels to carry children, or as as helpmeets, or as people to clean and cook and pick up after your spawn, and somebody to help you create your legacy, right? Like a lot of men think that legacy quite simply is like your offspring, right? But legacy is how people remember you when you're gone. Like, how are people going to remember you when you're gone? And I just don't think that women get enough credit for, the contributions that they make to society. And if we focused on making sure that the women within our society were uplifted and empowered, we would be an unstoppable force, because they have a perspective. Here's a question I'm going to ask you really quickly. I know that it's not my job to ask you a question, but here's a question I'm going to ask you. Sure. Right? Who knows men better than men?
I would think women do.
And why is that?
Because they're not men. They can step outside the mind. They're not step outside. They're outside the mindset. They're outside the toxic masculinity.
It's deeper than that.
Okay.
Women know men better than men know men, because if they don't, it could cost them their lives.
Makes sense.
And so having that unique perspective, right, is the key, you know what I'm saying? Literally to us progressing as a society. That's the key to us progressing as a society. They know us better than we know ourselves, because they have to. They have to keep themselves safe, to keep their children safe. And so if I were to point to the most unifying cause, it's been women's rights. And hopefully, at some point, all of us collectively wake up and see that needs to be the central focus of how we, move forward.
Yeah. And that's, excuse me, it made me think of when I was reading some Angela Davis, and She was talking about how much in particular in the 1800s, it's still happening now, of course, but how much unpaid work that women do in particular with raising the kids, cleaning the house, taking care of that stuff, that
Insane.
And it's unpaid. The society couldn't function without it, right?
And you couldn't even put a value on it. I mean, you can, you know what I'm saying? But for the most part, it's invaluable, contributions.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and we saw it. We saw just how we saw the effects of it in 2020 in particular, right? Kind of exacerbated. A lot of people got laid off, whether they were women or not, but there were lots of women who had to quit their jobs. I shouldn't say have to. They did quit their jobs to be home with the kids, right? Because one, there wasn't going to be anybody to take care of the kids. So it was like a necessity. But if they happened to be married or in a relationship with someone that was a male who had a job, right? That most of the time the males are making more money anyway, right? Mm-hmm. So in a situation like that, you're not they were going to be the one who naturally came home, unfortunately, right? And that hurt. That set everybody back.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is crazy to me. There's not a corporation on this planet that could function without women.
Right.
And I mean that.
Yep.
Because, they've been relegated to clerical work, right? But that clerical work is that's the bulk of what is taking place. But not only that, they're counselors within the workplace, right? They're intermediaries. They're settling disputes. They're getting people to fall in line. They're the soft voice when necessary to get people to focus or to ground people within the workplace. And I just don't think that people understand how instrumental a role women play in our society. And men are like, yeah, we don't need them. We don't, they shouldn't be able to, people are literally saying they shouldn't be able to vote anymore.
It's insane.
And, they don't know what's best for their own well-being, for their bodies. They were meant to carry babies. And so they shouldn't be able to decide whether they want to or not, essentially is what is being said.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, it's shameful, man. I don't even understand. Well, no, that's not true. I do know how we got here, right? But I don't understand how we continue to hang on to these archaic ideas when they're not helping us move forward.
There's a lot, we have that capitalist patriarchal propaganda everywhere, especially in the United States. I would say the United States is, if not the most, second most propagandized people on the planet.
Yeah, I would say this, North Korea, Russia, Israel, United States. And I feel like they're all vying for first place, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they're in a competition with each other to see who can be the most horrible.
Which one of us can be more manipulative and more controlling of our populace?
Right. Yeah. Despicable. But we see it everywhere, right? Just in the way. Wow. It's I can't even think of an example right now, even though I brought it up. But you see it everywhere. Commercials on TV, everywhere. Magazines, if those still exist. Right?
Growing up,
content.
So I would assume that, what I'm saying, you and I are around the same generation, the same age. You know what I'm saying? I'm in my 40s.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. So, growing up, we watch, what can I think of? Married with Children.
Yeah.
right? Stay-at-home mom, you got to cook and clean, you know, so on and so forth. We watched, you know, Family Matters, stay-at-home mom, got to cook and clean. You know, we watched all of these things that, you know, that place women in this secondary, or even, you know what I'm saying, like even beneath the children in a lot of cases, like the last person to be recognized or acknowledged within the household. And so, not perfect example, the Scream movie.
Yeah.
Right? The Scream movie. This person wanted to unalive, you know, the leading female characters, you know, because her mom, you know, had an affair with the dad. But like the dad was married.
The dad's the one that
Like
had
the mom was
much
like
to
Nev's
do with
mom.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the mom wasn't married. The dad was.
Right.
Like he committed the wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like she didn't make him do any of these things.
Right.
Like he did this, right?
Yep.
And so they like try to characterize her as this spinstress that, you know, made him do these things. Nobody made him, you know, have the affair.
Right.
And so now his son is out here, you know, unaliving people, killing people, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so used to using TikTok language, but he's out here killing people, you know, because his dad did some dirt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was subconsciously implanted in our brains
right.
to think and believe these things, that women are the issue.
We got a long way to go.
Right.
We got a long way to go. Oh man.
So far.
So when in your work or when you're making your content, whatever it is, when you're trying to educate people about class consciousness in particular, even if you're not directly trying to teach that to them, it comes through because that's what's happening, right? The capitalist class is waging a war on the rest of us, and they have for hundreds of years, right?
Right.
So when you're having those discussions, and what has worked best to try and get to help people understand, you know, what's actually happening. And this goes back to what you were talking about with how Trump made the outgroups, right? And said, you don't have what you want. If you're white and middle class, or white and working poor, or white and working class, if you don't have what you want, it's because of immigrants, or, you know, black people, or somebody who's not you, right? Who doesn't look like you or think like you. Like how, when you have been able to reach people, what has worked?
So I use a couple of examples, right? One of the best examples that I use is I ask people, whether you believe in God or not, you can't convince me that there's this whole planet full of wondrous things, beautiful landscapes, and amazing sights to be seen, that our only station in life, right, is to labor until we're 65, 67 years old. The average person dies, you know, within 5 years of retiring, and then die, right? Like labor until we're 65, 67, and then maybe, just maybe, have 5 years to enjoy life when our body is beat to shit and our mental health is at its worst. You know what I'm saying? And we're cognitively and physically declining, to enjoy life, and then boom, we're dead. You can't convince me that that's the meaning of life, that that's what we were supposed to do whilst being here. You can't convince me, right?
Yep.
the average McDonald's employee makes like $28,000 a year, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, sounds right.
They create over, you know what I'm saying, like $250,000 worth of revenue for the company. Like, so I think it's 286 thousand, somewhere in that region, right? So you're telling me that they only deserve less than 10%
Right.
of the revenue that they've generated for the company?
It's crazy.
Would Amazon be functioning without the people that work in the distribution centers?
No, hell no.
Right. Right. So why should you be literally the driving force, the heartbeat of these institutions, of these corporations, right?
Yeah.
And not be able to put food on your table or make sure that you have, stable housing or have health care or access to the same level of education that people that live in a zip code where the houses are, $2 and $3 million. Why shouldn't you be able to have, you know what I'm saying? Why shouldn't your material conditions be met in the same manner as the billionaires and millionaires that you work for?
Yep.
Maybe you don't get to have, the super expensive car, the Maybach, or the house with 13 bedrooms. But you also shouldn't have to live paycheck to paycheck so that they can have those things.
Right.
Because without you, they don't exist. Without you, they can't have those things. And so I think that, you know what I'm saying, like, is the best approach, like, to paint the picture. Like, hey, I want you to explain back to me why you believe that's okay. Why you believe that a person can own 20 houses that he rents out, far exceeding his mortgage payment, artificially inflating both the rental and housing market in that area in terms of values, right?
Yep.
And because of that, you can't afford to buy a house, but also you can't afford to buy a house because the value has been increased, but you also can't save any money because you're paying much more than a mortgage would cost for rent. And so I think that is the best approach you could possibly take. Will they receive it? That's a whole nother question.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Because for some reason, we've taught our society to believe that, you just got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Which that original saying was meant to be a joke.
Sure.
It was literally meant to be a joke. It was literally meant to be like, oh, you just make yourself levitate.
Yeah.
It's meant to be facetious in nature. And now we say it as if, it's an actual thing. And here's the other thing, right? It's very costly to be poor. If I was going to be a construction worker, and I know that I need steel toe boots, I can't afford, a $300 pair of steel toe boots that are going to last me for the next 20 years. So I'm going to run down to Walmart and I'm going to buy their steel toe boots that are $30. Right? And those steel toe boots might last me 4 months. And now I got to go back to Walmart and I got to buy another pair of steel toe boots. But now they're no longer $30. Now they're $40. And then 4 months from then, I got to go back to Walmart and I got to buy another pair of steel toe boots. But now they're $50. And I'm still getting paid the same wages. And 4 months later, I got to go buy another pair of steel toe boots and now they're $60. right? And so we continue this trend. And over the course of, a few years, I've spent more than the person who bought the steel toe boots that are going to last them 10 plus years. Because I just can't afford to make that investment, because I have other obligations that I have to, make sure are covered.
Yep. I get food.
Exactly. I got to buy food. I got to put gas in my car. My children need to go see the doctor. I got to buy them prescriptions, and so it's easy to say, yeah, all you got to do is work hard, except for the system doesn't care how hard you work.
Nope. And the harder you work doesn't help either.
Exactly
right?
That.
Like,
because the cost of goods are steadily increasing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But the wages aren't increasing with the cost of goods.
Right. And your surplus labor value is continues to be stolen. Right.
Exactly that.
It's just, it literally is stealing.
Legitimately. It's theft. It's wage theft. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's simply wage theft.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. So I thought of one other question too, that wasn't on the prep, but do you have a book recommendation for people? Doesn't matter what it is. Something you like, something you think everybody should read for one reason or another.
Yeah, I do, actually, matter of fact. Hold on one second. Give me a second.
Sure.
Because I want to be able to tell you the author. An Indigenous People's History of the United States is the book that I want people to read. That's the book that I want people to read here in the United States. I want people to understand, like what the beginning of this nation, right, looked like. Anything by Angela Davis. Anything by James Baldwin. Anything by Kimberle Crenshaw, who is the one of the major framers of intersectionality.
Can you say that name again, please?
Kimberle Crenshaw. So it's Kimberle Crenshaw, Crenshaww.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I like those. That would be, where I would start. But just to give people an idea of what the world looks like through an intersectional lens, through the microscope, of an existence that's different than yours. But yeah, I mean, that would be where, like where I would point people to. And people would say things like white fragility, right? But I tell people all the time, like, and it's not, because I'm anti-white or anything of that nature, but if you're reading literature that talks about intersectionality or racism from anybody who is not on the receiving end of those issues, then you're not getting the information that is necessary for you to form an educated opinion. I can't explain to you. There's no way in the world I could explain to you the experience of a woman. There's no way. I can empathize. I can theorize. But I can't explain to you, you know, what it means or what it's like to be a woman within this society, because I've never had to live it. And so when you are looking to truly educate yourself, you have to find people that live this experience from a marginalized position, from some of the most marginalized positions.
And I can second Angela Davis. For sure. I've read Women, Race, and Class.
Yes.
And extremely eye-opening for me. Like, you know, it's hard. It's hard to read, not because it's big words or written at a level that you have to have a PhD to understand.
Because no, it hits you in the ego.
It does 100%. And it's like, holy crap. Okay. This is where this is it. Okay. I get like the first two chapters in particular were like, holy
Craig, shit. I say this all the time.
Holy shit.
If my content and the things that I say make you uncomfortable, it was supposed to.
Sure.
That was the point. Because nobody grows in comfortable situations. Nobody's growing in you know, these comfortable situations. Literally, nobody's growing in these comfortable situations. You become complacent. You know, you become stagnant. You're like, I'm comfortable here. There's no reason for me to change, right?
Right.
People don't change. Situations change people. So whether it be a catastrophic event, right? Whether it be a life event in terms of having a child or going through a divorce or getting married or whatever. People don't change. Situations change people. Because essentially you are who you are. And so if you remain stagnant, if you're just simply standing still, well, that's death. Even water dies standing still.
Right.
And so I just feel like, you know, being uncomfortable is absolutely the point. Being uncomfortable is the point. Because now, right, in this uncomfortable space, you can say, well, hey, why am I uncomfortable? Why do I feel this way? How do I alleviate myself from this uncomfortableness? It's what helps you, you know, grow as an individual, grow as a person. And so, yeah, you gotta engage in shit. You gotta, you know, find yourself or place yourself in spaces and places that make you fucking uncomfortable.
For sure. All right. So is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Anything you want the listeners to know in particular, or just anything in general?
To be honest, I would say that community. If you don't know your next door neighbors, go introduce yourself. If you don't know the people that live across the street from you, go introduce yourself. If you don't have an established community that you know that you can turn to in times of need, create one. You were arbitrarily born into, a family by blood relation, but that doesn't mean that that has to be your quote unquote family. Family are the people that, that you build community with, that you create, that have your best interests in mind, and vice versa. You have their best interests in mind. Build community. I mean, that would be the message that I would give. Like, find people that you have similar interests with, and even if you don't, find where you do have common ground and build community. Find a way, to work with the people that you're around. That's how we change, society. That's how we change the world. We need to find, a way to work together towards the same ends. Other than that, empathy seems to be a lost art. I truly wish that, we were more empathetic as a society, especially knowing that not all of us, but the vast majority of us are barely, getting by. And so, if you're struggling, then somebody else is struggling. And so in that struggle, find people, that are working towards solutions to those struggles. And not just focusing on hate and fear. But yeah, I mean, like I said, community would be my overarching message.
It's great. It's really great. So where can listeners connect with you on social media, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So on YouTube, it's mr.jones_x. On TikTok, it's mr.jonesX. And on Instagram, it's mr.jones_x. You can also find me on Twitch at TuffLifestyle. Tough meaning transformative uprising for freedom. If you find me on any of those platforms, well, particularly Instagram or TikTok, I do have a Linktree in my bio that you can click on and find every single way to either follow me or see my content or message me or see the things that I've already participated in. So.
All right. Excellent. And I will, for the listeners, I will have all of that information in the show notes. Once it releases, all you got to do is just go and look in the episode notes, and all that'll be there. All the links plus the link tree will all be there. So you don't have to worry about trying to write it all down. You can it'll be there for you. So yeah. Well, hey, Patrick, thank you very much. This has been really great. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me on. I mean, it's been a pleasure. And I literally love the things that we've been able to talk about tonight. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That does it for the show. Thanks for listening. Voices from the Left is a presentation of the Anti-Capitalist Podcast Network. Special thanks to Nick Josephs for the use of the theme song. You can find Nick on Spotify or on the web at nickjosephs.com. Don't forget to rate and review on whichever platform you listen. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe at patreon.com/voicesfromtheleft or donate at buymeacoffee.com/voicesfromtheleft. All the links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and solidarity.